Hello everybody, once again it's Eddie Vegas here, and we're going to continue our series, our beginning tutorial series of how to play poker, and more specifically Full House Poker on Xbox Live. Today's tutorial is entitled The Art of Bluffing. Now, the Art of Bluffing, actually, we're a little bit ahead of the game here, but I'm making this video and this tutorial especially for some people that have asked me to give them a few tips about bluffing. So we actually will be getting into more basic stuff about flop play and stuff like that in the near future. But for the moment, we're just going to look at this really quickly. Okay. Actually, the Art of Bluffing is a little bit deceptive in terms of a title, because to tell you the truth, it's really not a good idea to bluff. And I know that's going to sound a little bit funny coming from me, but quite honestly, there are so many situations where it is not in your interest to bluff. I'm going to start off, and the great majority of this tutorial is going to be concerned with the reasons why you should not bluff. And then after that, we're going to get into the reasons why you should. So let's get started. The first reason: you can't bluff a donkey. Evidently, if somebody's going to be basically calling you with anything, if they have third pair and they think they have the nuts, there's absolutely no way they're going to be able to bluff this guy, because he maybe, the flop is king 9-2 and he has king 3, and basically he's never going to let go of that king, despite the fact he has a shitty kicker, and despite the fact that somebody else could have two pair or a flush draw or anything like that. He's never going to let it go. So first of all, really bad players that have absolutely no idea of how to play poker, you can't bluff them. Next, you can't bluff three people. Quite honestly, a lot of times when you're going to be raising pre-flop, and remember, you're supposed to raise pre-flop. Doesn't matter what you have. If you're bluffing, you raise. If you have a good hand, you raise. But quite honestly, a lot of times pre-flop you're going to be raising your standard 4 or 5k, assuming a 100k stack, and you're going to get three people in the pot. And one of my favorite expressions here is, there may be one donkey in the pot, but it's rare that there's two, and it's very rare that there's three. So if you're getting three people to call you, it's going to be really hard to bluff, because it's highly likely that somebody there has got a really good hand and they're calling anyway. Yeah, you really need to reduce the field. You prefer, if you're going to run a bluff, you prefer being heads up, or at the maximum three people, so that you're against two other people. But that's complicated. You really want to be heads up, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit later. Next, you can't bluff the nuts. Let's say you're deciding to bluff and somebody's got two pair, or they've got a flush, or they've got a straight, or they've got ace with a really good kicker, and the person is convinced that basically they have the nuts. They're never going to let it go. So if they have what they think is a good hand, doesn't matter, you can go all in, they're going to call you, and you're going to lose all your money bluffing this guy, because he's basically has a really good hand, or at least he thinks he has a really good hand, and he's never going to let it go. So you can't bluff the nuts. Finally, it is very difficult to bluff out of position. Here's the reason why. If you're out of position, you're going to be raising, and you're going to raise pre-flop, and somebody's going to call you, and when the flop comes, you're going to be first to act, not the other guy. And since you're first to act and you're bluffing, you're going to bet. Doesn't matter what you have. And say like the guy calls you, and now here comes the turn. It's up to you again. Well, if you're going to bluff, you're going to have to keep on betting. And if this guy calls you, well, you're in a world of hurt. The river comes, you bet again, and the guy, whatever happens, the guy calls you, he raises you all in. But basically, when you're out of position, you're obliged to keep on bluffing and keep on bluffing and keep on bluffing, and you really don't have the good information that you need to have when you're in position. Now, let's contrast being out of position with being in position. So you raise and you get a call. And here comes the flop. Now it's the other guy who has to bet. He checks. Of course, they always check. And you bet. He calls. Now you have good information about the guy. Maybe the flop hit him. You're bluffing anyway. So here comes the turn. And now the guy is going to check again. Of course, they always slow play. This is classic strategy on Full House Poker. They're always going to be slow playing. They're always going to be checking to you. Very rarely are you going to see somebody that does anything different than that. So they check to you. Well, that's good for you. You can, at this point, you can back out of the bluff. You can check behind. This is saving you money. And you can just basically, at that point there, you can wave the white flag. You can stop bluffing and get out of the hand cheaply. So now let's say he checks and you checks, and here comes the river, and he checks to you again. Or maybe say like he bets. If he bets, well, okay, you tried to bluff but it didn't work. You fold and you barely lost any money. So you see that being in position is critical, seriously critical, to pulling off a good bluff. It's very hard to bluff out of position. So look at all those reasons why you should not bluff. You would think that bluffing is a terrible strategy. However, you must bluff sometimes. I know this goes against everything I've said. However, it's really important for you to bluff from time to time. And I want to emphasize from time to time. No one can run a bluff every time. Nobody's going to believe you. But, however, you should. And in fact, it's important that you do bluff sometimes. Here's why. A observant player will notice that basically you are always raising and calling down with really good hands. And after he sees you do that 2 or 3 times, this observant player is going to know that you pretty much always have a really good hand when you're betting. And this observant player allows him to get away from your bets because he knows that you're not bluffing. So, what they say in poker terms, you need to balance your range. And when I say balance your range, I mean that yes, you need to be betting with the good hand, you need to be betting with the best hand, but from time to time you need to bluff. And believe it or not, even when your bluff doesn't work, it's still good for you. Say like you bluff and you're in position and you bluff, and say like it comes to the river and you still try to bluff and you make a bet and you get called. Oops, you have to turn over your cards and it looks like you were bluffing. Everybody at the table is looking at that, and if they're observant, they're going to be saying, whoa, check that out. This guy bluffed. Well, he's a bluffer, this guy. And especially this is really good for you because now you have the reputation as a bluffer. But you have a reputation as a sometimes bluffer. Not an all-the-time bluffer, but sometimes. And the next time you make a bet, the person will not know whether you're bluffing or whether you have a really good hand. So this doubt that you instill in the other player's mind is good for you. It means that they're not going to be able to get a read on you and that they're not going to know what exactly you're doing. So a bluff from time to time is a good thing. Now, let me just finish up by saying that I know this goes against everything that I've been saying about you need to play hand strength and suitedness and connectedness and just play basically good hands and fold all your shitty hands, and all that is true. That the fact that you need to be bluffing from time to time does not in any way change the fact that this is a very good strategy for you. However, you need to bluff to balance your range. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be bluffing from time to time, and I need to pound this into your heads that you don't want to be bluffing all the time, that you want to bluff rarely. Okay, so when you do bluff, you need to be bluffing in position. That means you have the button. And since I have impressed upon you in the previous tutorials that you need to be raising pre-flop, already you have set up the situation where you're saying, look at me, I've raised pre-flop, I have a really good hand. And of course you need to be in position because I've already talked about this, and the pre-flop raise is already making you do something that is super important, and that is to represent something. You are representing that you have a good hand by raising pre-flop. And when you continue with your flop betting, you are pounding home the fact that you have something. Let's take a quick example. Really simple. You raise pre-flop and a guy calls. The flop comes ace something something. Doesn't matter. You bet. This person, of course you're in position, remember? The other person is going, oh well, that's you've got an ace. Oh well, let's see, I really don't have an ace and I have nothing, so I'm going to fold. So this is something where you're actually representing something. And the funny thing about this is, let me make sure the music is still running. It should be anyway. Oops, no it's not. The funny thing about this is that you can get people to lay down really big hands, but you have to represent something. And another thing that's funny is that the better the player, the easier it is to bluff. Somebody like me, I'm going to be looking at the board and seeing if it's wet or dry, and I'm going to say, well, look, there's a possible straight on the board, there's a possible flush on the board, and all those things are going to be instilling doubt in my mind that maybe you have a straight or a flush or a two pair or something that's going to be beating whatever I have. So, funnily enough, the better the player, the easier it is to bluff, because the observant player is going to be looking at the board and is trying to decide, well, what exactly do you have? What did you raise the flop with? Somebody's going to be trying to put you on a hand, and the more dangerous the flop is, the easier it is to represent that you have a straight or a flush, even though, of course, you're bluffing and you don't have anything. I forgot to say one thing, is that do not neglect, and I forgot to write this down, but I'm going to emphasize it right now. Do not neglect the semi-bluff. The semi-bluff is when you have suited cards, and two suited cards come on the flop. So you have a flush draw. When you have a flush draw, you should bet it. You should not check. Go ahead and bet. There are two possibilities for you. One, you bet and they fold. Great. You just won the pot and you didn't have to even catch your flush draw. You already win. Fantastic. Possibility number two. You bet, they call, and your card comes making your flush. Great. Keep betting. The fact that you bet before you got your flush means that the other player is going to be saying, well, if there's a king on the board, well, maybe they have a king, and this is basically, if they think that you have a king and a king is on the board, they're not going to think that you have a flush. They're going to think you have king something and you have top pair, really good kicker, and they're not going to be putting you on a flush. So do not neglect the semi-bluff. The semi-bluff can be used with straight draws, with flush draws, and even with something like middle pair, where you have middle pair and, well, you're going to possibly make two pair or three of a kind and you have a few outs. There's certainly nothing wrong with go ahead and trying to bet there and trying to take the pot down without a battle. So that's pretty much it for this episode of my tutorials here in the Art of Bluffing. I hope that this has been useful, entertaining, and I hope you've learned something. I'll be showing up once again on my YouTube channel with more tutorials coming up, and we're going to be looking at flop play, and there's a whole bunch of interesting things we're going to be looking at. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and we'll be seeing you all real soon. Bye-bye.